You need to stop watching those financial shows, Barbara. They're filling your head with nonsense. My son-in-law's dismissive tone echoed through my kitchen as I sat at my wooden table. Spreadsheets and investment reports spread before me. The irony wasn't lost on me that Mark would say this while sipping coffee from a mug I'd purchased with returns from my carefully managed portfolio, the same portfolio he'd been mocking for the past 40 minutes. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I simply nodded and continued highlighting sections of the quarterly report that concerned me, particularly about the tech startup his firm had just heavily invested in. But that was 3 years ago. Today, I'm watching him pack his designer suits into cardboard boxes as my daughter Emma helps clear out his downtown office. The final step in his company's bankruptcy proceedings. I never set out to be a financial expert. Growing up in Mapleton, a mid-sized manufacturing town where the smokestacks of the paper mill dominated our skyline, money was something you earned through hard work, not clever manipulation of markets. My father worked at the mill for 42 years, and my mother stretched his paycheck with coupon-cutting precision that bordered on artistic. "A penny saved isn't just a penny earned, Barbara," she'd tell me while slicing open cereal boxes to use the blank cardboard inside for grocery lists. "It's a penny that works for you while you sleep." This philosophy stuck with me through college, where I studied accounting rather than the literature I loved because, as my father practically reminded me, books don't pay bills, but knowing how to manage money does. He wasn't wrong. After graduating, I secured a position at Mapleton Community Bank, where I spent the next 30 years. I never became an investment banker or Wall Street wizard, but as a loan officer who later managed the bank's modest investment products, I developed an intuitive understanding of financial patterns that even my fancier-educated colleagues sometimes missed. I met my husband Tom in that bank. He came in seeking a small business loan for a carpentry shop, and I was assigned to his application. His business plan was solid. He had a clear vision, reasonable projections, and a humble approach that immediately caught my attention. "I'm not looking to get rich," he told me during our first meeting. "I just want to create beautiful things and earn enough to live comfortably." We were married 18 months later, and our daughter Emma arrived the following year. Tom built our modest 2-story colonial on Oak Street with his own hands, working evenings and weekends while maintaining his growing business. I continued at the bank, advancing to manager of personal banking services. We weren't wealthy by national standards, but in Mapleton, we were comfortable. We saved diligently, invested cautiously but consistently, and by our 50s had accumulated a nest egg that would see us comfortably through retirement. When Tom died suddenly of a heart attack at 58, I found myself alone with our financial security, but without the man I'd planned to enjoy it with. Emma was already in graduate school by then, pursuing her MBA at a prestigious university 3 hours away. The house felt cavernous without Tom's booming laugh or the constant soundtrack of his power tools in the garage workshop. Nights stretched endlessly, and I found myself turning to financial news shows and investment forums to fill the silence. What began as a distraction soon became a passion. I started small, reallocating our conservative portfolio to include carefully researched growth stocks. I joined an investment club with former colleagues from the bank and spent hours studying market trends and economic indicators. The analytical part of my brain, which had always served me well in banking, flourished in this new challenge. By the time I retired from the bank at 62, I had nearly doubled our modest portfolio through disciplined, research-backed investments. Emma met Mark during her final year of business school. He was a guest lecturer, a rising star at Velocity, capital partners who spoke about disruptive innovations and emerging markets with the kind of charismatic confidence that filled auditoriums. 12 years older than Emma, Mark had the polished appearance of success, custom suits, a German luxury car, and a condominium in the most exclusive high-rise downtown. Their whirlwind romance concerned me, not because of the age gap, but because of the drastically different approaches to money I observed during their courtship. "He's brilliant, Mom," Emma would gush during our weekly phone calls. "His firm is backing these incredible startups that are going to change everything. He says conservative investing is for people without vision." I bit my tongue. My daughter had inherited her father's warm heart and my analytical mind, but Mark's influence was evident in her sudden dismissal of financial caution as outdated thinking. When they announced their engagement after just 8 months of dating, I gave them my blessing, along with a sensible check toward their wedding expenses. Privately, I wondered how Mark's appetite for risk would affect my careful, thoughtful daughter. Their wedding was a lavish affair at Mapleton's newly renovated Grand Hotel, a stark contrast to the simple garden ceremony Tom and I had enjoyed 30 years earlier. I wore a designer dress Emma had insisted on buying me and smiled through conversations with Mark's colleagues, who spoke of market disruption and venture capital with religious fervor. "Your son-in-law is quite the catch," whispered Diane, my oldest friend from the bank, as we watched Mark charm a group of investors at the reception. "Emma's set for life with him." "Perhaps," I said, sipping my champagne. "Though I wonder about some of those tech investments his firm is making. The valuations seem detached from actual revenue." Diane laughed. "Always the conservative banker. Barbara, the market's changed since our day. These young hotshots know what they're doing." Maybe they did. But as I watched Mark gesture expansively while describing some new app that would revolutionize how people ordered coffee, I couldn't help but remember all the can't-miss investments I'd seen fail during my 3 decades in banking. Excitement isn't sustainability, and disruption without underlying value is just expensive chaos. After the wedding, Emma and Mark bought a stunning 5-bedroom house in Lakeview Estates, Mapleton's most exclusive neighborhood. The down payment was modest. "We're leveraging our excellent credit and my firm's trajectory," Mark explained, when I tactfully inquired, and their mortgage was nearly 4 times what Tom and I had borrowed for our home, even accounting for inflation. They filled the house with designer furniture and smart home technology that Mark controlled from his phone, sometimes changing the lighting or music mid-conversation just to demonstrate the system's capabilities. I visited every Sunday for dinner, watching as their lifestyle expanded to include country club memberships, exotic vacations, and increasingly expensive cars. Emma had taken a marketing position at a local firm, but spoke often about leaving to help Mark launch a side venture once it secured second-round funding. "You should let Mark help you with your portfolio, Mom," Emma suggested about 6 months after their wedding. We were sitting on their expansive deck overlooking a professionally landscaped yard, while Mark grilled Wagyu steaks. He's increased his personal investments by 40% in just the last 2 years. "That's impressive," I acknowledged, watching as Mark flipped the steaks with obvious satisfaction. Though I'm comfortable with my current approach, Mark joined us, handing me a glass of wine that probably cost more than I typically spent on an entire dinner out. "Emma's right. Barbara, no offense, but your generation's investment strategy is painfully outdated. Low-risk, low-return thinking might have worked in the 90s, but we're in a different world now." "Different doesn't always mean better," I replied mildly. "I've been pleased with my consistent returns." Mark laughed, that indulgent chuckle, reserved for those he considered financial dinosaurs. "Consistent mediocrity is still mediocrity. My smallest positions outperform your entire portfolio, Barbara." I smiled and changed the subject, asking about Emma's work. But that conversation established a pattern that would repeat with increasing frequency over the next year. Mark would extol his latest investment triumph. Emma would suggest I modernize my approach, and I would deflect, unwilling to critique my son-in-law's strategy despite my growing concerns. The truth was, I had been researching Mark's firm and its investments. My years in banking had taught me to look beyond the glossy presentations to the fundamental numbers, and what I saw troubled me. Velocity Capital Partners was heavily invested. In technology startups with impressive user growth but minimal revenue streams, their business models relied on future monetization strategies that seemed speculative at best, delusional at worst. Moreover, the firm's own financial structure included significant leverage, borrowing against existing assets to finance new acquisitions, a strategy that magnified returns but also catastrophically magnified losses if investments soured. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I kept these observations to myself until a warm evening in late May, almost 2 years after Emma and Mark's wedding. We were celebrating my birthday at their home, and Mark was especially ebullient, having just closed a major funding round for his pet project, a social media platform for luxury goods enthusiasts called Prestige. "We're going to revolutionize how the affluent market connects," he announced, pouring more champagne into our flutes. "Exclusive communities, authenticated, luxury goods trading, concierge services, all in one platform." "It sounds impressive," I said, accepting the refill. "What's your path to profitability?" Mark's smile faltered slightly. "We're focused on user acquisition and experience refinement in this phase. Monetization comes later, once we've established the network effect." I nodded, familiar with the terminology from my research. "And your burn rate?" Emma shot me a warning look, but Mark laughed. "Barbara's been doing her homework. Yes, we're burning through about $2 million a month right now, but that's standard for our growth phase. We've secured 18 months of runway with this funding round." 18 months isn't very long in business terms, I observed. "What happens if the next round of funding coincides with a market correction?" The atmosphere shifted perceptibly. Mark set down his glass. "That's exactly the kind of outdated thinking that keeps retail investors like yourself in index funds earning 4% while the real money is made in venture capital." "Mom is just being cautious," Emma interjected, obviously trying to smooth things over. "She's always been conservative with money." "Conservative is one word for it," Mark said. "Fearful might be more accurate." "No offense, Barbara, but watching financial news shows and managing a retirement portfolio doesn't make you qualified to evaluate cutting-edge business models." I felt a flash of irritation but kept my voice level. "You're right that our approaches are different. I just worry about the focus on user growth over revenue generation, especially with interest rates likely to rise." Mark's expression hardened. "Interest rates? Barbara, we're creating entirely new markets here. Traditional metrics don't apply." He turned to Emma. "This is why I've told you we should handle your mother's portfolio. She's leaving money on the table with these Depression-era strategies." Emma looked uncomfortable, caught between her husband and mother. "Maybe we could revisit this conversation another time. It's Mom's birthday." I agreed quickly, not wanting to spoil the evening. But as we moved on to cake and presents, I couldn't help noticing how Mark's demeanor had changed. What had begun as celebratory confidence had hardened into something more brittle, a defensiveness I recognized from years of working with borrowers whose projections didn't withstand basic scrutiny. That night marked a subtle shift in my relationship with Mark. Our Sunday dinners continued, but he increasingly steered conversations away from business and finance when I was present. Emma mentioned casually that he found my questions unnecessarily negative and suggested I focus on more pleasant topics during our family time. I might have done exactly that if not for a disturbing trend I noticed in Emma's demeanor. My vibrant, independently minded daughter was becoming increasingly anxious. She would check her phone constantly when Mark was running late, her smile too bright when discussing their financial decisions. When I asked about her marketing job, which she'd once loved, she dismissed it as just temporary until she could join Mark at Prestige, though that transition kept being delayed. Then came the renovations. Despite having lived in their Lakeview Estates home for less than 2 years, Mark decided it needed a complete overhaul to reflect their status. Walls were demolished, custom cabinets installed, and a wine cellar, constructed in what had previously been an entirely adequate storage room. Emma showed me the plans with forced enthusiasm, pointing out features she'd never previously expressed interest in, like a dedicated whiskey tasting room and a smart entertainment system that required specialized technicians to operate. "This is quite an investment," I commented as we reviewed the kitchen plans, which included replacing perfectly serviceable high-end appliances with custom European models. "Are you sure the timing is right, with interest rates starting to climb?" Emma's smile faltered. "Mark says we need to invest in our lifestyle. The house will appreciate even more with these improvements." "I'm sure it will be beautiful," I said carefully. "I just remember your dad always saying renovations should be approached with caution. The return rarely matches the investment." "Dad was a carpenter, Mom. He was biased toward doing things himself." Emma's tone was defensive. "Mark says we're in a different position. These upgrades affirm our place in certain circles." I nodded, recognizing that any further comment would only create tension. But that evening, I spent hours researching Velocity, Capital Partners' public investments, and the larger market conditions. What I found confirmed my worst fears. Several of their most prominent portfolio companies were missing revenue targets while continuing to spend lavishly on expansion. Meanwhile, the Federal Reserve was signaling a series of interest rate hikes that would make the firm's leveraged investment strategy increasingly expensive to maintain. Most concerning was Prestige, Mark's pet project. Despite his claims of explosive user growth, the platform's engagement metrics, which I found buried in an industry analysis report, were troubling. Users signed up, attracted by celebrity endorsements and exclusive event access, but activity dropped sharply after the initial excitement. The network effect Mark touted was failing to materialize, while development costs soared. I debated whether to share my concerns with Emma. Our relationship had always been close, but Mark's influence had created a growing distance between us. I feared pushing her further away if I criticized her husband's business acumen, yet I couldn't shake the feeling that my daughter and her financial security were at risk. My decision was made for me when Emma called one Tuesday afternoon, her voice tight with controlled panic. "Mom, do you have time to meet for coffee, without Mark?" We met at a small cafe in downtown Mapleton, far from their neighborhood and Mark's usual haunts. Emma looked exhausted, the designer clothes and perfect makeup that had become her uniform unable to conceal the strain in her eyes. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" I asked, once we were seated in a quiet corner with our drinks. She glanced around before answering, lowering her voice. "Mark's been staying at the office until 2 or 3 in the morning most nights. When I asked about it, he said they're dealing with expected turbulence in some investments." She twisted her wedding ring nervously. "He's been short-tempered, secretive about calls. Last night I overheard him arguing with someone about bridge financing falling through." My stomach tightened, but I kept my expression neutral. "Has he discussed any specific concerns about Velocity's portfolio?" "No, he shuts down whenever I ask, but..." She hesitated. "Our credit cards were declined twice this week. Mark said it was a bank error, but I checked our accounts. Several are nearly empty, and there have been massive transfers to something called VCP Contingency Holdings." This was worse than I had anticipated. "Emma, I need to ask you something important, and I need you to be completely honest. Are your names on the home loans for the renovations, or just Mark's?" Her eyes widened. "Both of us, of course. Mark said it was important for tax purposes. There's the mortgage, the home equity line for the renovations, and some kind of specialized lending product for the smart home systems." She paused, realization dawning. "Mom, what's going on? Is Mark in trouble?" I reached across the table and took her hands in mine. "I'm not certain, but I've been worried about Velocity's investment. Strategy for some time. Their portfolio companies are underperforming while burning through capital, and rising interest rates are making their leveraged positions increasingly expensive. Emma's face paled. You think they're going bankrupt? That's impossible. Mark says they're just in a temporary cash flow situation while waiting for new rounds of funding. That may be what he believes, I said gently. But temporary cash flow situations in venture capital often precede larger collapses, especially when multiple portfolio companies struggle simultaneously. Tears filled her eyes. What should I do? We're in the middle of these massive renovations. The contractors are expecting another payment next week. I squeezed her hands. First, we need to understand exactly what you've signed and what your personal liability might be. Then we need to assess your joint financial situation independently of Mark's business assets. My daughter, who had inherited my analytical mind beneath her polished exterior, nodded shakily. I have copies of everything in my home office. Mark never bothers with that room since I decorated it too femininely for his taste. Good. Can you gather those documents without raising suspicion? We need to move carefully here. Emma agreed. To collect the paperwork and meet me the following day at my house. As she stood to leave, she hesitated. Mom, remember when you questioned Mark about Prestige's path to profitability at your birthday dinner? How did you know to ask that? 30 years in banking teaches you which questions matter, I said simply. And I've been researching Mark's investments since you got engaged. Not because I didn't trust him, but because I wanted to understand the world my daughter was entering. A complex emotion crossed Emma's face. Realization, regret, and a hint of the determined young woman I'd raised. I should have listened to you. There's time for that later, I assured her. Right now, let's focus on protecting your future. After Emma left, I spent hours preparing for our meeting the next day. I pulled together resources on bankruptcy protection, credit impact mitigation, and financial recovery strategies. I created spreadsheets ready to be populated with their asset and liability information. Most importantly, I contacted Cecil Hammond, my former colleague who had become a specialist in financial crisis management after leaving the bank. It sounds like classic over-leverage combined with venture capital hubris, Cecil said after I explained the situation, careful to keep Emma and Mark's identities confidential. If your family member's spouse has commingled business and personal finances, which is unfortunately common in these situations, they need to act quickly to establish separate financial identities. Cecil agreed to join our meeting, bringing his expertise in navigating financial collapse. I went to bed that night with a heavy heart, but clear purpose. My daughter was facing what might be the most challenging period of her life, but she wouldn't face it alone. The skills and knowledge I'd developed throughout my career, the very expertise Mark had dismissed as outdated and irrelevant, might now be the framework that would help Emma rebuild. The next morning, I rose early and prepared the dining room table with legal pads, calculators, and a pot of strong coffee. Cecil arrived at 9, professional in his manner but with the compassionate eyes that had made him effective with clients facing financial distress. We were reviewing our approach when Emma's car pulled into my driveway precisely at 9:30. She carried a large accordion file and a laptop bag, her expression a mixture of determination and fear. I have everything: loan documents, account statements, credit card bills for the last year, and I printed our credit reports this morning. She hesitated in the doorway when she saw Cecil. Mom? This is Cecil Hammond, a trusted colleague from my banking days who specializes in financial crisis management, I explained, guiding her to the table. I thought his expertise would be valuable, but if you're uncomfortable having him here... Emma straightened her shoulders. No, I need all the help I can get. Thank you for coming, Mr. Hammond. What followed was 6 hours of methodical financial archaeology. We spread documents across the table, creating a comprehensive picture of Emma and Mark's financial situation. The reality was worse than I had feared. Their mortgage was an interest-only product with a balloon payment due in 3 years. The home equity line for renovations carried an adjustable rate that had already increased twice. Credit card debt exceeded $120,000 across 8 cards, most at promotional rates set to expire within months. Most concerning were the personal guarantees Mark had persuaded Emma to sign for prestigious equipment leases and office space. Documents she admitted signing without fully reading because Mark said it was standard procedure and time-sensitive. These create significant personal liability, Cecil explained gently. If prestige fails, creditors can pursue your joint assets and potentially your future earnings. Emma's hands trembled as she sorted through bank statements. Mark always handled our finances. He said my strength was earning, not managing money. The irony wasn't lost on any of us. My daughter, who had grown up learning about financial responsibility and had earned an MBA from a prestigious university, had abdicated her financial agency to a man whose business was now imploding. The immediate priority is to establish financial separation, Cecil advised. Not necessarily legal separation from your husband, but protection of your assets and income from his business liabilities. Emma looked up, her expression haunted. You think it's that bad? I hesitated, but honesty was essential now. Based on what you've told us about the bridge financing falling through and the transfers to this contingency holding company, yes. Mark is likely moving money to protect it from creditors, which suggests he anticipates legal action. My daughter's face crumpled, but only briefly. When she looked up again, I saw a resoluteness that reminded me of her father. Tell me what to do. Over the next few hours, we developed an action plan. Emma would open separate accounts at a bank, different from any they currently used. She would redirect her next paycheck to this new account and begin the process of legally documenting which assets were hers alone, primarily inheritance from her father and jewelry she'd owned before marriage. Cecil provided guidance on which joint obligations could potentially be addressed through hardship programs and which might require legal intervention. He also suggested Emma consult with a bankruptcy attorney who specialized in separating personal and business liabilities, not necessarily to file immediately, but to understand her options. What about our home? Emma asked. The renovations are only half complete. We can't sell it like this, but we can't afford to finish either. One step at a time, I counseled. First, secure your income and establish separate finances. Then we can address the housing situation. As Emma gathered the documents at day's end, she looked simultaneously exhausted and relieved. I can't believe this is happening. Everything seemed so perfect with Mark. His confidence was so absolute. That's often the warning sign, Cecil said kindly. In 30 years of banking, the clients who worried appropriately about risk rarely needed crisis management. It's the ones who never doubted their infallibility who ended up in my office. After Cecil left, Emma stayed for dinner, a simple meal of homemade soup and bread that reminded us both of quieter times. As we ate, she asked the question I'd been expecting all day. When did you know? About Mark's business, I mean. When did you realize it was headed for trouble? I considered my answer carefully. I had concerns from the beginning about his approach to risk and leverage, but specifically about Velocity Capital, probably about 8 months ago, when interest rates started rising and I noticed several of their portfolio companies missing growth targets while maintaining extravagant spending. 8 months, Emma repeated. That's when Mark started pushing for the renovations, said we needed to live the success story to attract the right investors. She set down her spoon. He knew, didn't he? He was creating the appearance of prosperity even as everything was collapsing. It's not uncommon, I said gently. People in financial distress often double down on displays of wealth to maintain access to new capital. It becomes a cycle that's difficult to break. Emma was quiet for a moment, stirring her soup thoughtfully. You tried to warn me in your way. All those careful questions about profitability and user engagement. But I just saw it as you being old-fashioned and risk-averse. You saw it as me questioning your husband's expertise, I corrected. That's natural. You trusted him. I stopped trusting myself, she said quietly. Somewhere between falling in love with Mark and watching him dismiss everything I'd learned. From you and Dad about money, I started to believe his narrative that new approaches had rendered traditional financial wisdom obsolete. I reached across the table and took her hand. Financial principles are like physics, sweetheart. The packaging changes, the technology evolves, but gravity still works the same way. Income still needs to exceed expenses eventually. Assets still need to generate real value. Risk still requires appropriate reward. A small smile touched her lips. Banking wisdom from Barbara Parker. I should have listened all along. We finished dinner discussing practical next steps. Emma would return home and continue gathering information while taking actions to separate her finances from Mark's increasingly precarious situation. We agreed to meet again in 2 days to assess progress and refine our strategy. As I walked her to the door, Emma paused. How bad is this going to get, Mom? Honestly? I considered sugarcoating my answer, but decided my daughter deserved the truth. Based on what we've uncovered today, Mark's business is likely heading for bankruptcy or significant restructuring. Your personal finances are deeply entangled with his business liabilities. Unraveling that will be difficult and potentially contentious, especially if he's already moving assets. The next year, at minimum, will be challenging. Emma nodded, accepting this assessment with remarkable composure. But we can rebuild after? There's a path forward? Always, I assured her. I've seen people recover from far worse financial situations. You're young, well-educated, and have a strong support system. This is a setback, not a life sentence. She hugged me then, fiercely, reminding me of the little girl who would cling to me after falling off her bicycle, gathering courage before trying again. Thank you for being ready to help, even after I dismissed your concerns for so long. That's what mothers do, I said simply. We wait in the wings, ready when needed. After Emma drove away, I sat on my porch swing watching nightfall over Mapleton. The modest homes on Oak Street, with their tidy yards and sensible vehicles, represented a financial philosophy Mark had ridiculed, but that had withstood countless economic cycles. Tom and I had built our life on solid ground, perhaps not reaching the heights Mark had aspired to, but never facing the collapse Emma was now confronting. I thought about the portfolio that Mark had dismissed as consistently mediocre. Steady investments that had weathered market fluctuations through diversification and realistic expectations. I thought about the emergency fund I'd maintained, even during lean years, and the conservative mortgage we'd paid off ahead of schedule. These weren't exciting financial decisions, but they were sound ones that had created lasting security. As crickets began their evening chorus and porch lights flickered on along the street, I felt a profound gratitude for the financial wisdom my parents had instilled in me and that I had tried to pass to Emma. That wisdom hadn't prevented her current crisis, but it would be the foundation of her recovery. And perhaps, through this painful experience, she would rediscover her own financial voice, the confident, analytical perspective that had been temporarily overshadowed by her husband's charismatic certainty. Tomorrow would bring difficult conversations and complicated decisions. Emma would need to confront Mark about his financial deceptions while protecting herself from their consequences. I would need to balance supporting my daughter without overstepping boundaries or fostering dependency. But tonight, I could take comfort in knowing that the first steps toward recovery had been taken, and that the financial principles I'd spent a lifetime practicing were proving their enduring value in my daughter's moment of greatest need. The next morning, I woke before dawn, my mind already racing with plans to help Emma navigate the impending financial storm. After decades of rising at 5:30 a.m. for my banking career, early mornings remained my most productive time. I made coffee and settled at my kitchen table with a fresh legal pad, methodically outlining potential scenarios and contingency plans for my daughter's situation. The maple trees outside my window were just beginning to show their autumn colors, a reminder that change, while sometimes painful, was also natural and necessary. I'd always found comfort in seasonal transitions. They reinforced my belief that difficult periods eventually give way to new growth. My phone rang at 7:15 a.m. Emma, her voice tight with controlled panic. "Mom, Mark didn't come home last night. I just got a text saying he's handling a situation at the office and not to worry." I kept my voice deliberately calm. "Did he mention anything about financial matters?" "No, but..." She hesitated. "After we talked yesterday, I checked our safe. The documents for my inherited properties from Dad are missing. So is my grandmother's jewelry collection." My stomach tightened. These weren't good signs. "Emma, I think you should come here immediately. Bring whatever financial documents and personal valuables you still have at home." "You think he's..." She couldn't finish the sentence. "I think we need to secure what's left while we assess the situation," I said carefully. "Let's not jump to conclusions, but let's be prudent." 90 minutes later, Emma arrived with 2 suitcases and several document boxes. Her normally perfect appearance was disheveled, her designer clothes replaced by jeans and one of her father's old flannel shirts she'd kept after his death. The sight of her in Tom's shirt, swimming in the fabric but somehow looking more like herself than she had in months, made my heart ache. We carried everything into my dining room, which I'd already prepared with file folders, sticky notes, and a pot of fresh coffee. As we sorted through papers, a clearer picture emerged of just how entangled Emma's finances had become with Mark's business ventures. "He had me sign these last month," Emma said, pushing forward a stack of documents. "Said they were standard investor protections for the next round of prestige funding." I reviewed them carefully, my concern growing with each page. "Emma, these aren't just investor protections. You've personally guaranteed additional loans for prestige using your inheritance properties as collateral." Her face paled. "But those properties were never in our joint names. Dad left them specifically to me. Which is why Mark needed these documents. They explicitly extend your personal guarantee to assets that would otherwise have been protected." I set the papers down gently, choosing my next words carefully. "Sweetheart, do you remember exactly what he told you when he asked you to sign?" "These?" Emma stared at the documents, her expression shifting from confusion to dawning horror. "He said it was routine paperwork the new investors required. Something about demonstrating family commitment to the vision. He brought them home after dinner, when we'd had wine. Said they needed to be notarized immediately because the funding round was closing the next morning." My blood ran cold. The timing, the alcohol, the artificial urgency. These were classic pressure tactics. "Was the notary someone you knew?" She shook her head. "Mark brought him. Said he was the company's regular notary who was doing us a favor by coming after hours. I made a note to have Cecil investigate whether proper notary procedures had been followed. If there were irregularities, we might have grounds to challenge the documents." As we continued our financial archaeology, Emma's phone rang. Mark's name appeared on the screen. She glanced at me uncertainly. "Put it on speaker," I suggested. "But don't mention where you are or what we're doing." She nodded and answered. "Hello?" "Emma." Mark's voice sounded strained. "Where are you? I came home and you weren't there." "I needed some time to think," she replied carefully. "You didn't come home last night. I told you I was handling a crisis at the office. Look, I need you to do something important. Remember those property documents your father left you? I need you to bring those to the office immediately. And your grandmother's jewelry collection. Emma's eyes met mine, wide with confirmation of our fears. Why do you need those? There was a brief pause. It's complicated. We have an opportunity to secure bridge financing, but we need to demonstrate additional collateral. It's just temporary, a formality. Mark, those properties aren't joint assets. They're my inheritance. His tone sharpened. Which is why I need the actual documents, Emma. This is a critical moment for prestige, for us. I don't have time to explain complex financial strategies right now. The dismissive condescension in his voice was familiar, the same tone he'd used countless times with me when discussing investments. I could see from Emma's expression that she was recognizing it too, perhaps for the first time hearing it as an outsider would. I'll need to think about this, she said, her voice steadier than I expected. Those properties were important to my father. There's nothing to think about, Mark snapped. This is happening now. The investors are waiting. Where are you? I'll come get the documents myself. Emma muted the phone and looked at me, panic rising in her eyes. I wrote on my legal pad, "Buy time. Don't commit. Don't say where you are." She unmuted. I'm not comfortable making this decision right now, Mark. I need to understand exactly what's happening with the company. Damn it, Emma. Is this your mother's influence? Has Barbara been filling your head with her outdated financial paranoia? Emma flinched but held firm. This has nothing to do with my mother. It's about my inheritance and my right to understand what's happening before making decisions. We don't have time for this, he growled. The business is in a critical transition phase. If you can't trust me to handle our financial future, what does that say about our marriage? The manipulation was so transparent it made my teeth clench, but I remained silent, allowing Emma to navigate this conversation herself. It says we need better communication, she replied. I'll call you later after I've had time to think. She ended the call before he could respond. For a moment, the room was silent except for the ticking of my grandfather clock in the hallway. Then Emma let out a shaky breath. He's never spoken to me like that before. Financial pressure reveals character, I said gently. And it sounds like the pressure at Velocity Capital must be intense right now. Emma nodded slowly, a new determination settling over her features. He's after the properties and jewelry. That means they're not already gone, which is something. She straightened, the documents before her with precise movements. What do we do now? We need legal help immediately, I replied. Not just for the financial aspects, but to secure court orders protecting your inheritance if possible. I called Meredith Oakes, a formidable attorney who had handled my financial matters since Tom's death. Unlike many lawyers who specialized narrowly, Meredith had expertise in both estate and bankruptcy law, a combination that made her uniquely qualified for our situation. She arrived at my house 90 minutes later, her no-nonsense attitude exactly what we needed. After reviewing the documents Emma had brought, Meredith's assessment was blunt. We need emergency injunctions for the inherited properties immediately. The personal guarantees are problematic, but there might be grounds to challenge them based on disclosure issues and notarization concerns. She looked at Emma directly. I won't sugarcoat this. Your husband appears to be attempting to appropriate your separate assets to salvage his business ventures. The timing and methods suggest deliberate planning. Emma's chin trembled slightly, but she nodded. What can we save? The inherited real estate, potentially, if we act today. The jewelry? Meredith shrugged. Portable assets are difficult to recover once removed. What about retirement accounts? Life insurance policies? I have a 401k through my marketing firm, Emma said. And Dad's life insurance paid out to me years ago. It's in a separate investment account Mark doesn't have access to. This was one small blessing. The financial structures I'd helped Emma establish after Tom's death had kept some assets segregated, despite Mark's efforts to consolidate everything under his control. Meredith made several calls from my dining room, setting legal machinery into motion with impressive efficiency. By noon, she had arranged for emergency hearings and temporary restraining orders to prevent any transfers or encumbrances of the inherited properties. "Now for the difficult question," Meredith said, closing her laptop. "What do you want the end result to be here, Emma? Are you looking to protect assets during a business restructuring, or are we discussing a more permanent separation from both, the business and potentially the marriage?" Emma stared at the table for a long moment. When she looked up, her eyes were clear. "I don't know yet about the marriage. That depends on whether Mark has been deliberately deceiving me or is just desperate to save his company. But either way, I need financial independence again. I can't continue in a relationship where I'm expected to surrender my assets without question." Meredith nodded approvingly. "That's a healthy perspective. We'll proceed with asset protection as the priority, leaving personal decisions for when you have more information and security." After Meredith left to file emergency court papers, Emma and I finally ate a late lunch. The nervous energy that had sustained her all morning seemed to evaporate, and she looked suddenly exhausted. "You should rest," I suggested. "Your old room is still made up." She shook her head. "I need to go back to the house, Mom. If I disappear completely, Mark might do something drastic. It's better if I return, now that we've secured the legal protections." A wave of fear washed over me. "Are you sure that's safe?" He was very angry on the phone. "Mark's never been physically threatening," Emma assured me. "His weapons are charm and manipulation, not force. And now that I see his tactics clearly, they're less effective." I recognized the determined set of her jaw, the same expression Tom would get when he'd made up his mind. "At least let me come with you." She considered this, then nodded. "Actually, that might be helpful. Having you there will keep the conversation focused on financial issues rather than emotional manipulation." We drove separately to the Lakeview Estates house, Emma in her car, me following in mine. The property looked different through my newly critical eyes. The massive scale, the ostentatious architectural details, the half-completed renovations with expensive materials sitting exposed to the elements, all of it seemed like a physical manifestation of Mark's precarious financial strategy. Impressive on the surface, but fundamentally unsound. Mark's car wasn't in the driveway, but as we approached the front door, it swung open. He stood in the entryway, his normally immaculate appearance noticeably disheveled. His designer suit was rumpled, his face unshaven. "Emma, thank God," he began, then stopped when he saw me behind her. His expression hardened. "Barbara, I should have known." "Hello, Mark," I said calmly. Emma asked me to join her for moral support. He ignored me, focusing on Emma. "Where have you been? I've been worried sick. And why aren't you answering? My calls about those property documents?" Emma walked past him into the house with a confidence I hadn't seen in months. I turned my phone off to think clearly. And I've decided I'm not using my inheritance as collateral for Prestige or any other Velocity Capital venture. Mark followed her into the living room, frustration radiating from him. "This isn't the time for arbitrary boundaries, Emma. The entire company is in a transitional phase that requires liquidity flexibility." "You mean it's collapsing?" Emma said quietly. "Which is why you're trying to access my separate assets." He froze momentarily, then recovered. "That's an extremely uninformed characterization. We're navigating expected market turbulence while refinancing our capital structure." I remained silent, letting Emma lead the conversation. She'd spent the drive preparing what she wanted to say, and I could see her mentally reviewing her points. "Mark, I've been cooperative with every financial request for 2 years. I supported the extravagant house purchase, the unnecessary renovations, the lifestyle that stretched even your considerable income, but my inheritance is where I draw the line." "This isn't about luxury spending," he protested. It's about saving a groundbreaking company that will ultimately be worth hundreds of millions. Your mother has always been financially conservative, to the point of paranoia, and now she's infected you with the same limited thinking. Emma didn't take the bait. This isn't about my mother's influence. It's about my right to make informed decisions about my own inheritance. Where are my property, documents, and my grandmother's jewelry? The directness of the question seemed to catch Mark off guard. They're secure, he said vaguely. I moved them to the office safe as a precaution. There have been break-ins in the neighborhood. I'd like them returned immediately, Emma said. Mark's expression darkened. That's not possible right now. The documents are being prepared for the bridge financing presentation. Without my authorization? He made a dismissive gesture. Your signature is on the personal guarantee forms. The legal team is just implementing what you've already agreed to. Emma glanced at me, then back to Mark. I'm contesting those guarantees, Mark. Meredith Oakes filed emergency injunctions this morning to prevent any encumbrance of my inherited properties. All pretense of composure vanished from his face. You did what? On the advice of your small-town banking mother and some local lawyer? Do you have any idea what you've done? Protected my separate assets, Emma replied steadily, which I have every legal right to do. Mark began pacing, running his hands through his disheveled hair. The bridge financing was contingent on those properties. Velocity is leveraged to the limit, and Prestige is burning $2 million a month. Without additional collateral, the entire structure collapses. Then perhaps it should collapse, I said, quietly, speaking for the first time since entering the house. If a business model can only survive by consuming its founder's personal assets, it's not sustainable. He whirled on me. This is rich coming from you, Barbara. You, who's never built anything of significance, who spent your career in a second-rate local bank making safe, mediocre investments. You have no concept of how modern finance works. I understand that sustainable businesses eventually generate more money than they spend, I replied evenly, and that excessive leverage magnifies failure as much as it magnifies success. The jewelry and documents, Mark, Emma interjected, bringing the conversation back to the immediate issue. I want them returned today. He stared at her for a long moment, calculation visible behind his eyes. The jewelry is in the office safe. I can get it tomorrow. The property documents are with the legal team. Emma crossed her arms. Not acceptable. I want the jewelry tonight. And I want written confirmation from your legal team that they'll cease all actions related to my inherited properties. Or what? He challenged. Or I instruct Meredith to proceed with criminal conversion charges in addition to the civil actions already filed. Emma's voice was remarkably steady. Taking someone's inheritance documents without permission and attempting to use them against their explicitly stated wishes has legal consequences. Mark, I felt a surge of pride watching my daughter stand her ground. The confident, analytical woman I'd raised was re-emerging from beneath the veneer of trophy wife that Mark had cultivated. His expression cycled through anger, calculation, and finally, a semblance of conciliation. Fine. I'll get the jewelry tonight, and I'll speak to legal about the property documents. He checked his watch. I need to get back to the office now. We'll talk more later. After he left, Emma sank onto the coum, pristine white sofa that had cost more than my car. That was harder than I expected. You were magnificent, I told her honestly. Clear, firm, and focused on the specific issues at hand. She offered a tired smile. I learned from the best. Dad always said you were the most effective negotiator he'd ever seen because you never got sidetracked by emotion. The mention of Tom brought a bittersweet ache. He would have been so proud of Emma today. Your father was right about many things, especially about marrying for character rather than charm. Emma looked around the cavernous living room with its half-completed renovations and ostentatious furnishings. I got so caught up in Mark's vision of success that I lost sight of what actually matters. All of this, she gestured at the space, feels like a movie set now. Impressive at first glance, but hollow behind the facade. She stood up with sudden resolve. I should pack some essentials. I don't think I'll be staying here tonight after all. I helped Emma gather clothes, personal documents, and meaningful items, family photographs, a small wooden box Tom had made for her graduation, books that had special significance. As we worked, I noticed how few personal touches existed in the sprawling house. Everything seemed selected for appearance rather than meaning or comfort. In the primary bedroom, Emma paused before a framed photograph on her nightstand, the only personal item in the aggressively modern space. It showed her and Mark on their wedding day, both laughing as they fed each other cake. I really did love him, she said softly. Still do, in some complicated way. But I don't think I ever truly knew him. Love and clear-eyed assessment can coexist, I told her. One doesn't negate the other. She placed the photograph in her suitcase. When did you first suspect Mark's business was in trouble, Mom? You never said anything directly. I considered the question carefully. About 6 months ago, when Velocity's portfolio companies began missing their projected milestones while maintaining extravagant operational spending, the pattern resembled what I'd seen in the 2000 tech bubble, prioritizing growth metrics over sustainable revenue models. 6 months ago is when Mark started pushing for the home renovations and upgrading all our vehicles, Emma noted, creating the appearance of success while actual success was slipping away. It's unfortunately common, I said. When business fundamentals weaken, some entrepreneurs double down on displaying the trappings of success to maintain investor confidence. Emma closed her suitcase with a decisive zip. I should have listened to your concerns about Prestige's path to profitability. You asked exactly the right questions, and I dismissed them because Mark made me feel that traditional financial metrics were outdated thinking. You wanted to support your husband's vision, I said gently. That's natural. It wasn't just that. Emma's voice was thoughtful. There was something intoxicating about Mark's absolute certainty, his dismissal of conventional limits. After growing up with Dad's careful craftsmanship and your methodical approach to money, his boldness seemed exciting, liberating even. She carried her suitcase to the hallway, pausing to look back at the room. But there's a massive difference between calculated risk-taking and recklessness. Dad and you took meaningful risks. Buying equipment for the carpentry business, investing in your education, building a house when you were both young. But those risks were grounded in reality and careful assessment. We descended the sweeping staircase that had been the centerpiece of the recent renovations, marble imported from Italy at staggering expense. The contrast between this house and the home Tom and I had built were stark. Our modest colonial on Oak Street had grown organically over decades, each improvement carefully saved for and often executed by Tom's skilled hands. This mansion had been acquired in a single leveraged transaction and renovated with borrowed money, prioritizing immediate impression over long-term value. As we loaded Emma's belongings into our cars, her phone chimed with a text. She checked it, her expression tightening. Mark says he can't get the jewelry tonight after all. Claimed the office building security system is being updated and no one can access the secure floor until morning. I sighed. Do you believe him? No, she said flatly. Which means we need to call Meredith again. Before we could discuss further, a sleek black Audi pulled into the driveway at speed. The man who emerged wasn't Mark, but I recognized him. Immediately from Emma's wedding, Richard Keller, Mark's business partner and co-founder of Velocity Capital. Emma, he called, striding toward us with the same forceful confidence I'd observed at the wedding. Thank God you're here. Is Mark with you? Emma shook her head. He left for the office about an hour ago. Isn't he there? Richard's expression confirmed my growing suspicion that Velocity's troubles were even worse than we'd imagined. No one at the office has seen him today. He's not answering calls or texts. He noticed me standing beside Emma and nodded tersely. Mrs. Parker. Mr. Keller, I replied. What's happening at Velocity that has everyone so concerned about Mark's whereabouts? He hesitated, clearly considering how much to reveal. There's a situation with our primary funding line. Mark was supposed to present alternative collateral arrangements to the Capital Committee this afternoon. My inherited properties, you mean? Emma said, her voice cooling noticeably. Richard had the grace to look uncomfortable. I'm not familiar with the specific assets involved. Then perhaps you should be, I suggested, especially since they include properties that were never part of Mark and Emma's marital assets and are now protected by court injunctions against encumbrance. This was clearly news to him. Court injunctions? When did this happen? This morning, Emma replied. After I discovered Mark had taken my inheritance documents and family jewelry without permission, apparently planning to use them as collateral without my informed consent. Richard paled slightly. Emma, I had no idea. Mark assured the board that you were fully supportive of using all available assets to secure bridge financing. Well, I'm not, she said firmly. And given that he attempted to appropriate my separate property without proper authorization, I'm now questioning everything about Velocity's and Prestige's financial representations. Richard glanced between us, reassessing the situation. I think we should continue this conversation privately, Emma. These are sensitive corporate matters. My mother stays, Emma stated flatly. She's been right about Velocity's unsustainable financial model from the beginning, and I trust her judgment implicitly. I remained silent, allowing Emma to establish her boundaries. Richard looked briefly like he might argue, then seemed to recognize the determination in her stance. Fine. He lowered his voice despite the empty driveway. Velocity is facing an immediate liquidity crisis. Our primary lender has called in their outstanding notes, citing covenant violations. Without significant additional collateral by close of business tomorrow, they'll force a technical default that will trigger cross-default provisions across all our financing arrangements, meaning bankruptcy, I translated. Richard winced at the blunt assessment, but nodded. Potentially, yes. Mark assured the board and our lenders that he had access to real estate assets valued at approximately $4 million that could bridge the gap until our next funding round closes. My father's commercial properties, Emma said, which Mark knows I would never use as collateral for his ventures. Dad built that portfolio over decades of careful investment and management. I understand your attachment, Richard said, his tone sliding into the same condescending register Mark often used when discussing financial matters with me. But in business, emotional connections to assets can impede rational decision-making. Emma straightened her spine, standing taller than I'd seen her in months. There's nothing irrational about refusing to pledge separate assets to prop up a fundamentally flawed business model, Mr. Keller. Especially when that business has consistently prioritized growth metrics over sustainable revenue generation. Richard blinked, clearly surprised by her articulate assessment. He'd likely been expecting the polished but financially deferential woman Mark usually presented at company functions. The current challenges are temporary, he insisted. The market is undervaluing innovation-driven platforms like Prestige. Once user acquisition reaches critical mass, monetization will follow naturally. That's the same argument I've heard for 2 years, Emma replied. Meanwhile, Prestige burns through capital while user engagement metrics actually decline after initial sign-up. The network effect isn't materializing because the platform doesn't solve a genuine market need. I couldn't have articulated the fundamental problem more clearly myself. Richard's expression revealed his shock at hearing such a precise critique from someone he'd likely dismissed as merely a founder's supportive spouse. These are complex business strategies that require specialized expertise to evaluate properly, he said. retreating to the familiar territory of credentialism that Mark employed when challenged. My daughter has an MBA and grew up learning financial analysis from me, I interjected mildly. She's more than capable of evaluating business fundamentals. Richard glanced at his watch, his composure visibly strained. Regardless of past strategies, we have an immediate crisis requiring decisive action. Emma, is there any scenario where you would consider using those properties to secure short-term financing, perhaps with additional protections or guarantees? No, she said simply. Not one. And my attorney has already secured injunctions preventing any encumbrance of those assets, so further discussion is pointless. He ran a hand through his hair, the gesture eerily reminiscent of Mark's earlier frustration. Then Velocity faces potential bankruptcy, and Prestige will almost certainly be liquidated. Is that really what you want? To destroy everything Mark has built? Emma didn't rise to the emotional bait. What I want is transparency and respect for my financial autonomy. What happens to Velocity and Prestige is the result of management decisions made long before today. Richard's phone buzzed. He checked it, his expression darkening further. I need to go. If you hear from Mark, please tell him the Capital Committee is waiting and Langford is threatening to call in outside counsel. He handed Emma a business Call me if you reconsider about the properties. We have until 5 p.m. tomorrow. After he left, Emma and I stood in silence for a moment, processing the new information. It's worse than we thought, she finally said. Richard wouldn't have come personally if they had any other options. I nodded. The mention of covenant violations suggests their lenders have been concerned for some time. Those don't trigger. Immediately, there would have been warning periods, opportunities to remedy the issues. And Mark hid all of it from me, Emma said quietly, while pushing for renovations, luxury purchases, and access to my inheritance. We finished loading, our cars in thoughtful silence. As Emma locked the front door of the mansion that had never really felt like her home, she turned to me with resolute eyes. I need to find grandmother's jewelry before they start liquidating assets. And I need to understand exactly what Mark has done with my name and signature over the past 2 years. One step at a time, I counseled. Tonight, you rest. Tomorrow, we continue building the financial firewall between you and whatever is about to happen at Velocity. As we drove away from Lakeview Estates, I glanced in my rearview mirror at the imposing house receding behind us. Its grand facade, half covered in renovation tarps, seemed a perfect metaphor for the financial house of cards Mark had constructed. Impressive at first glance, but ultimately unfinished and unsustainable. Emma slept in her childhood bedroom that night, curled beneath the quilt I'd made for her 16th birthday. Through the thin wall separating our rooms, I heard her crying softly in the early morning hours, but resisted the urge to comfort her. Some griefs need to be processed alone, and my daughter had always been fiercely independent in her emotional work, much like her father. Over coffee the next morning, Emma's red-rimmed eyes contrasted with her resolute expression. I've been thinking all night about what Richard said. The 5 p.m. deadline for additional collateral means they've exhausted all their conventional options. I nodded, pouring her a second cup. That tracks with what we know about venture capital structures. They've likely already leveraged every business asset and are now looking to founders' personal resources. Which means Mark's personal finances must be depleted too, Emma said thoughtfully. Otherwise, he wouldn't need my inheritance properties. This logical deduction led to a disturbing possibility. We should check your joint accounts and credit cards immediately. Emma pulled out her laptop, logging into their online banking portal. Her sharp intake of breath confirmed my fears before she turned the screen to show me. Their joint checking account, which had contained over $30,000 just last week according to the statement she'd brought yesterday, now showed a balance of $200.46. Their savings account was entirely empty. He's drained everything, she whispered. I squeezed her hand. When did the withdrawals happen? She navigated through the transaction history. Large transfers started 3 days ago, right after I questioned him about the bridge financing falling through. The final withdrawal was yesterday afternoon, right after our confrontation. Check your credit cards too, I suggested. The news there was equally alarming. Each of their joint credit cards was maxed to its limit with cash advances taken within the past 48 hours. The only financial resource that remained untouched was Emma's personal checking account, which held her direct deposited salary from the marketing firm. He's preparing for bankruptcy, I said gently, consolidating whatever liquid assets he can access before creditors freeze everything. Emma stared at the screen, her expression hardening from shock to anger. All those lectures about sophisticated financial strategy, and in the end, his plan was to drain our accounts and use my inheritance to prop up his failing company. She closed the laptop with decisive finality. I need to call Meredith right away, and my bank to change access permissions on my personal account. Over the next 2 hours, Emma made a flurry of calls, systematically securing what remained of her financial life. She froze joint credit cards, reported unauthorized withdrawals on the joint accounts, and arranged for her next paycheck to be deposited into a new account at a different bank. Meredith advised her to file a police report regarding the missing jewelry and documents, creating an official record that might prove crucial in upcoming bankruptcy proceedings. The bank can't guarantee recovery of the withdrawn funds, Emma reported after finishing her calls, since Mark had legitimate access to the accounts. But they've flagged everything as disputed, which might help during legal proceedings. Was impressed by her methodical approach. The analytical mind I'd always known she possessed was now fully engaged, cutting through emotional turmoil to focus on practical necessities. What about the house and renovations? I asked. Meredith says to let them go, Emma replied, surprisingly matter of fact. The mortgage is underwater due to the high-interest refinancing Mark took out to fund the renovations. There are mechanics' liens from unpaid contractors, and the property taxes are actually delinquent, despite what Mark told me. She recommends including the house in whatever bankruptcy filing becomes necessary. How do you feel about that? Emma glanced around my modest kitchen with its well-worn countertops and the refrigerator still covered in her childhood artwork and academic achievements. Relieved, honestly. That house never felt like home. It was always Mark's showcase, not our sanctuary. Her phone rang. Richard Keller again. She put it on speaker. Emma, we need to meet immediately, he said without preamble. Mark's still unreachable, and the Capital Committee requires answers about the collateral situation by noon. I've been very clear about my position, Richard. My inherited properties are not available as collateral for Velocity's obligations. He made an exasperated sound. This isn't just about Velocity anymore. The SEC has opened a preliminary inquiry into our disclosures to investors. If we don't present a coordinated response, things could get much worse for everyone, including you. Emma's eyes widened at the mention of the Securities and Exchange Commission. She muted the phone and looked at me questioningly. This changes the equation, I said quietly. SEC involvement suggests potential securities violations beyond just business failure. She unmuted. What exactly is the SEC investigating? Richard hesitated. I can't discuss that over the phone. We need to meet in person, preferably with your attorney present. Emma considered this. I'll meet you at Meredith Oakes' office at 10:30. That's the only location I'm willing to discuss these matters. After setting the details and ending the call, Emma immediately contacted Meredith, who agreed to host the meeting and recommended bringing a financial forensic specialist. Cecil Hammond was available on short notice. His expertise in banking fraud and bankruptcy proceedings would be invaluable. Do you think Mark could be involved in securities fraud? Emma asked as we drove to Meredith's office. I chose my words carefully. Based on what we've seen of Velocity's practices, the emphasis on appearance over substance, the pressure to use personal assets as business collateral, and now the SEC inquiry, there are certainly concerning patterns. Whether those rise to the level of intentional fraud or simply reflect reckless optimism is what we need to determine. Reckless optimism, Emma repeated thoughtfully. That's a charitable way to describe it. Richard arrived at Meredith's office precisely at 10:30, accompanied by a severe-looking woman he introduced as Diane Fairchild, Velocity's corporate counsel. They seemed taken aback by the presence of both Meredith and Cecil, clearly having expected to deal only with Emma and perhaps a general practice attorney. "Let's be clear about the purpose of this meeting," Meredith began, her tone professionally firm. "Ms. Parker has learned that her husband may have misappropriated her separate property and potentially misused her signature on financial documents. She's also been informed that the SEC has opened an inquiry into Velocity Capital. We're here to understand the potential implications for her as Mr. Winters' spouse." Richard and Diane exchanged glances. "The situation is complex," Diane said carefully. "Velocity Capital has received a request for information from the SEC regarding certain disclosures made to investors about Prestige's user metrics and projected revenue streams." "What exactly was misrepresented?" Cecil asked bluntly. Another uncomfortable exchange of glances before Richard answered. "There may have been some optimistic characterizations of user engagement and retention statistics. Fabricated numbers," Cecil translated, "presented to investors as factual data." "That's an overstatement," Diane interjected quickly. "The presentations included forward-looking projections based on early metrics, with appropriate disclaimers." Cecil raised a skeptical eyebrow. "And were those early metrics themselves accurate?" The silence that followed was answer enough. "What's Mark's involvement in these presentations?" Emma asked, her voice remarkably steady. Richard shifted uncomfortably. As CEO of Prestige and a partner at Velocity, Mark was the primary presenter to potential investors. He worked with our analytics team to develop the presentations. Did he know the metrics were inaccurate? Her direct question hung in the air. "We're still assessing exactly who knew what and when," Diane said smoothly. "Which brings us to the purpose of this meeting. Emma, given your position as Mark's spouse and the joint financial structures you share, it would be in everyone's best interest for you to coordinate with Velocity's response team regarding any SEC inquiries." Meredith interjected before Emma could respond. "Let me be absolutely clear. My client will not be coordinating her responses with Velocity Capital. She had no involvement in or knowledge of the company's representations to investors, and she will cooperate independently with any regulatory investigations. That approach could create significant complications," Diane warned, "especially given that Mark has used joint assets in connection with company financing." "Which is precisely why we're establishing clear separation," Meredith replied. "Emma has already documented the unauthorized withdrawal of funds from joint accounts and the attempted appropriation of her separate property. She will not align herself with potentially fraudulent business practices." Richard leaned forward, dropping the corporate demeanor and addressing Emma directly. "Emma, I understand you're upset about the current financial situation, but Mark built Prestige for both of you. Everything he did was aimed at creating long-term wealth for your family. Separating yourself from him now, when things are challenging, seems premature and potentially damaging for everyone." Emma met his gaze steadily. "Richard, I appreciate that you may believe that, but unauthorized withdrawals from joint accounts, attempting to use my inheritance as collateral without proper disclosure, and apparently misrepresenting business metrics to investors aren't challenges we're facing together. They're actions taken without my knowledge or consent that put my financial future at risk." "We have no confirmation that Mark misrepresented anything," Diane said sharply. "The SEC inquiry is preliminary." "Then why has no one been able to reach him since yesterday?" Emma asked. Why did he empty our accounts and try to access my inheritance documents? The question hung in the air unanswered. Cecil cleared his throat. Perhaps we should focus on practical matters. Does Velocity Capital intend to file for bankruptcy protection given the collapsed bridge financing? Richard and Diane exchanged another glance. The board is considering all options, Richard finally said, including potential restructuring under Chapter 11. And Prestige? I asked, speaking for the first time. Given its cash burn rate and inability to secure additional funding, what's its projected operational runway? Richard turned to me with poorly concealed irritation. With all due respect, Mrs. Parker, Prestige's internal financial projections are confidential company matters. Not when they directly impact my client's financial situation, Meredith countered. As Mark's spouse, Emma has potential liability exposure depending on how assets and debts have been structured. After further uncomfortable silence, Richard reluctantly admitted, without the bridge financing, Prestige has approximately 2 weeks of operational capital remaining. The admission confirmed what I had suspected for months. The business model was fundamentally unsustainable without continuous external funding. 2 years of development, millions in investment, and aggressive user acquisition had failed to create a platform that could support itself. Given these circumstances, Meredith said briskly, we'll be filing for legal separation immediately. To establish clear financial boundaries, Emma will cooperate fully with any legitimate regulatory investigations, but will not coordinate her responses with Velocity Capital or its representatives. That seems unnecessarily adversarial, Diane objected. A coordinated approach would benefit everyone, including Emma. My client's priority is protecting her own financial integrity, Meredith replied firmly, which necessarily requires distancing herself from potentially problematic business practices. The meeting concluded shortly thereafter, with Richard making one final appeal to Emma's loyalty and shared history with Mark. She remained resolute, agreeing only to relay a message if Mark contacted her. After they left, Cecil turned to Emma with newfound respect. You handled that admirably. They were trying to entangle you in what sounds like a developing securities fraud case. The SEC doesn't open inquiries without cause, Meredith agreed. And Mark's disappearance combined with the financial maneuvers suggests he anticipated regulatory problems. Emma sat back, suddenly looking exhausted. All this time, I thought I was married to a visionary businessman taking calculated risks to build something revolutionary. Instead, it appears I was married to someone falsifying data to secure funding for an unsustainable vanity project. We don't have confirmation of fraudulent intent yet, I reminded her gently. This could still be a case of excessive optimism and poor business judgment, rather than deliberate deception. She gave me a wan smile. Always the measured banker, Mom, looking for the most charitable interpretation. It served me well in assessing situations, I acknowledged. Though in this case, I admit the evidence is concerning. After reviewing next steps with Meredith and Cecil, we left the office with a clear action plan. Emma would file for legal separation immediately to establish financial boundaries. Forensic accounting would begin on all joint accounts and transactions. Most importantly, Emma would document everything she knew about Velocity's and Prestige's business practices to prepare for potential SEC interviews. As we walked to our cars, Emma paused. I should check on the house, make sure Mark hasn't returned and removed more items. I'll come with you, I offered immediately. Actually, Mom, I think I need to do this alone. Her voice was steady. I've been relying on you heavily these past 2 days, which I'm grateful for, but I need to start handling some aspects of this myself. I recognized the healthy boundary setting of a capable adult reclaiming her independence. Of course. Just call me when you're done, and remember not to engage with Mark alone if he's there. I promise, she said, giving me a quick hug before heading to her car. I returned home to find a message from Cecil on my answering machine. Barbara, Call me as soon as you can. I found something concerning in the public records regarding Emma's inherited properties. My stomach tightened as I dialed his number. Cecil answered immediately. I've been researching the title records for the commercial properties Tom left to Emma, he explained without preamble. There are recent filings against all 3 properties, mechanics liens in substantial amounts. How is that possible? I asked, confused. Those buildings are fully paid for and well maintained? Emma uses a property management company that handles all repairs and maintenance. These aren't legitimate repair liens, Cecil said grimly. They appear to be fabricated obligations to a company called Wintercrest Maintenance Services, LLC. The documentation claims unpaid maintenance services totaling $1. $2 million across all 3 properties. The air left my lungs. Wintercrest, using Mark's last name. Exactly. The LLC was formed 3 months ago with Mark Winters listed as the managing member. The liens were filed last week, just before Emma discovered the missing property documents. My mind raced through the implications. He created a fake maintenance company to place liens against Emma's properties, then tried to get the physical documents to prevent her from discovering the encumbrances. That's my assessment, Cecil confirmed. It's a crude but potentially effective tactic if not caught quickly. The liens wouldn't withstand legal scrutiny, but they could create enough cloud on the title to delay any protective actions while Velocity attempted to secure financing using the properties as collateral. This crosses the line from desperate business tactics into outright fraud, I said, my voice hardening. We need to alert Meredith immediately. After hanging up with Cecil, I called Meredith's office, but she was in court. Her assistant promised she would call back as soon as possible. Next, I tried Emma's cell phone, but it went straight to voicemail. I left an urgent message asking her to call me before engaging with Mark. Anxiety mounting, I decided to drive to the Lakeview Estates house myself. As I backed out of my driveway, my phone rang, an unknown number. Mrs. Parker? The female. Voice was unfamiliar. This is Officer Danielle Reynolds with the Mapleton Police Department. Are you the mother of Emma Winters? My heart froze. Yes, I am. Is Emma all right? There's been an incident at her residence, the officer said carefully. Mrs. Winters is unharmed but quite distressed. She gave us your number and asked if you could come to the house. I'm on my way, I said, already turning onto the main road. Can you tell me what happened? It would be better to explain in person, ma'am. Please ask for me when you arrive. The 12-minute drive to Lakeview Estates was the longest of my life. As I turned onto their street, the flashing lights of police cruisers came into view. 3 patrol cars parked haphazardly in front of the house. A small crowd of neighbors had gathered at a discreet distance, watching the proceedings with undisguised curiosity. I parked behind the last patrol car and hurried toward the house, where an officer stood guarding the entrance. I'm Barbara Parker, Emma Winters' mother. Officer Reynolds called me. One moment, ma'am. He spoke into his radio, and moments later, a tall woman in uniform emerged from the house. Mrs. Parker, I'm Officer Reynolds. Thank you for coming quickly. Where's my daughter? I asked, scanning the area. She's in the kitchen with Detective Harmon. She's physically fine, just shaken. Officer Reynolds guided me toward the house. Your daughter arrived home to find the residence in disarray. It appears her husband may have removed numerous items of value. As we entered through the front door, the extent of the disarray became immediately apparent. The house had been systematically stripped of anything valuable. The expensive artwork that had hung in the foyer was gone, leaving only hooks in the walls. The antique console table Mark had insisted on buying at auction had vanished, along with the designer lamps and decorative objects that had adorned nearly every surface. The living room presented a similar scene. Empty spaces where valuable items had stood, packing materials scattered across the floor, mounting brackets exposed where the enormous television had been removed from the wall. even the custom drapes, had been taken, leaving bare windows staring blankly at the manicured but now eerily empty patio where designer furniture had once stood. I found Emma sitting at the kitchen island with a middle-aged man in a suit who introduced himself as Detective Harmon. Her face was pale but composed. "Mom," she said, standing to embrace me. "I'm sorry they called you. I just didn't know who else." "Of course I should be here," I assured her, holding her tightly for a moment before turning to the detective. "What exactly happened?" Detective Harmon consulted his notes. Mrs. Winters arrived at approximately 1:45 p.m. to find the residence in its current condition. The security system had been disarmed using a valid code, and there are no signs of forced entry. Based on Mrs. Winters' initial inventory, it appears that artwork, electronics, furniture, and other valuables have been removed. She's also reported that her husband has been unreachable for approximately 24 hours and recently withdrew substantial sums from their joint accounts. "This isn't a burglary," Emma said flatly. "Mark took everything, even the wine collection from the cellar. Over 300 bottles, many worth hundreds each." Detective Harmon nodded. "In situations involving married couples, determining whether this constitutes theft becomes legally complex. The items were presumably marital property, and without a separation agreement or court order in place." "Some items were gifts specifically to me from my family," Emma interjected, "and he left behind anything that wasn't obviously valuable." She gestured to the kitchen drawers that hung open, revealing ordinary utensils and dishes left behind, while the expensive small appliances and designer cookware were gone. "We've documented everything," the detective assured her. "This report will be valuable for your divorce proceedings, even if criminal charges aren't applicable at this stage." As Emma continued discussing details with the detective, I walked through the house, cataloging the systematic nature of Mark's actions. Bedrooms had been picked clean of electronics and designer clothing, specifically Emma's jewelry and accessories. His home office was completely emptied, not a paper left behind. The guest rooms were untouched except for the removal of any decorative items of value. When I reached the primary bedroom, I noticed the closet door ajar. Inside, Emma's extensive wardrobe remained largely intact, but a particular section caught my attention. A row of empty hangers where I knew she kept her most expensive designer dresses, the ones Mark had insisted she needed for company functions. Moving to her vanity, I saw the jewelry boxes open and empty. Not surprising, given what we already knew about her grandmother's collection. But something about the scene troubled me. I studied the room more carefully, trying to identify what felt wrong. Then it hit me, Emma's personal office across the hall. The one room Mark supposedly never entered because he found it too feminine. I walked quickly to the doorway and flipped on the light. The destruction was immediate and striking. Unlike the rest of the house, where items had been selectively removed, this room looked like it had been searched by someone in a rage. Desk. Drawers were upended, their contents scattered across the floor. Bookshelves had been cleared with a sweeping arm, leaving books splayed open and damaged. The desktop computer was gone, its cables dangling limply, but papers had been torn and strewn about as if someone had been searching frantically for specific documents. "Emma," I called, my voice tight with concern. "You need to see this." She appeared in the doorway moments later, Detective Harmon behind her. Her sharp intake of breath confirmed this wasn't how she'd left the room. "My office," she whispered. "He destroyed it." Detective Harmon surveyed the scene with new interest. "This presents differently from the rest of the house. Was there anything of particular value or importance kept in this room?" Emma slowly entered the chaos, carefully stepping around scattered papers. "This is where I kept my personal financial records. Bank statements for my separate accounts, tax documents from before our marriage, the trust documents for my inheritance." She moved to the desk, running her fingers along an empty drawer. "My portable hard drive with personal photos and documents was here. The hard drive is potentially significant, Detective Harmon noted. Unlike household items, personal data has clearer ownership boundaries, even in marriage. Emma knelt to gather some of the scattered papers, then froze, staring at something half hidden under an overturned chair. She reached for it, a small velvet pouch, the kind used for jewelry. With trembling fingers, she opened it and tipped the contents into her palm. A single pearl earring fell out, clearly part of a pair, its mate missing. "Grandmother's pearls," she said, voice catching. "He must have dropped this in his hurry." She looked up at me, eyes filling with tears for the first time since we'd entered the house. "He took everything, Mom. Not just the valuable items, but my personal documents, my data, even the photo albums from before I met him." Detective Harmon made careful notes. "This targeted destruction of personal effects and documents combined with the specific removal of premarital items strengthens the case for criminal mischief at minimum. I'll amend the report to reflect these findings." After the police finally left, Emma and I stood in the kitchen of the nearly empty house. The silence felt oppressive, broken only by the occasional hum of the refrigerator, apparently too difficult to move on short notice. "What do I do now?" Emma asked, her voice small but steady. "He's taken almost everything of value, drained our accounts, and disappeared." I considered her question carefully. "First, we document everything. What's missing, what's damaged, what remains. Then we accelerate the legal separation proceedings Meredith has prepared. And most importantly, we check on those fraudulent liens Cecil discovered against your inherited properties." "Fraudulent liens?" Her head snapped up. "What liens?" I explained what Cecil had found in the public records. "That's why I was trying to reach you earlier. Mark created a fake maintenance company and filed liens against all 3 commercial properties. Over $1 million worth." Emma's expression shifted from confusion to cold anger. "So this wasn't just desperate business measures. This was calculated fraud using my inheritance." "It appears so," I acknowledged. "And given what we've seen here today, I think we need to assume the worst about his intentions." She nodded slowly, resilience visibly rebuilding in her posture. "Then we fight back, properly, legally, and without hesitation." She glanced around the stripped kitchen. "I don't need any of this. The house, the designer things, the showcase, lifestyle, none of it matters. But I won't let him steal my inheritance or damage my financial future." In that moment, I saw Tom's determination in our daughter's eyes, the same quiet, implacable resolve he would show when facing a challenge. It settled my own anxiety to see that core strength emerging. "Let's go home," I suggested. "We'll call Meredith from there and update Cecil on what we found." Emma took one last look around the house that had never truly been her home. "Yes," she said firmly. "Let's go home." The morning headlines made everything worse. Velocity Capital under SEC investigation. CEO Mark Winters missing. I set the Mapleton Gazette on my kitchen table where Emma could see it when she came downstairs. 3 days had passed since discovering the emptied house, and each day had brought new revelations about Mark's financial manipulations. The newspaper article would be just another blow, but Emma deserved to be prepared before venturing into town. The coffee had just finished brewing when I heard her footsteps on the stairs. She looked better than she had in days, rested, focused, and wearing one of her old college sweatshirts rather than the designer clothes that had become her uniform during her marriage. "Morning, Mom," she said, kissing my cheek before pouring coffee. Then she spotted the newspaper. "Ah, front page news now." She sat down and read the article without visible emotion. The story outlined what we already knew. The SEC investigation into Prestige's user metrics, Mark's disappearance coinciding with the collapsed bridge financing, and Velocity Capital Partners' impending bankruptcy filing. What was new was a statement from Richard Keller distancing the firm from Mark's independent actions. Interesting, Emma said, setting the paper aside. Richard's throwing Mark under the bus. Unauthorized representations and actions counter. To firm policy sound like they're positioning him as a rogue operator. I nodded. Classic damage control. They're isolating the problem to protect the broader firm. Will it work? She asked, sipping her coffee. Depends on what documentation exists, I replied. If board minutes or email chains show they knew about the misrepresentations, the SEC won't be fooled. But it might buy them time with investors and limit personal liability for the other partners. Emma's phone chimed with a text. Meredith, the emergency hearing for the fraudulent liens is confirmed for 2 p.m. today. She set the phone down. She also says there's been a development regarding my inheritance documents. We arrived at Meredith's office at noon to review the case before the hearing. Cecil Hammond was already there, along with a severe-looking woman Meredith introduced as Helena Frost, a specialist in securities fraud who had previously worked for the SEC. We've made significant progress untangling Mark's actions, Meredith began. First, regarding your inheritance documents, we've confirmed they were used to create falsified power of attorney forms. Emma's fingers tightened around her coffee cup. To what end? To attempt transferring ownership of the commercial properties to Wintercrest Holdings, Cecil explained. The forged power of attorney claimed you had authorized Mark to manage all aspects of your inheritance. But that wouldn't work, I interjected. Title transfers require notarized signatures from the actual owner. Helena nodded. Under normal circumstances, yes. But combined with the fraudulent maintenance liens, it created a legal smokescreen. Winters was attempting to use the falsified power of attorney to resolve the liens by transferring the properties to Wintercrest, essentially from his left pocket to his right. The scheme's audacity was breathtaking. He was trying to steal Emma's properties outright, not just use them as collateral, I said, voicing the obvious conclusion. Precisely, Meredith confirmed. Fortunately, the title company flagged the unusual transaction pattern and placed everything on hold pending verification. That's when Mark abandoned the approach and emptied your house instead. Emma absorbed this information with remarkable composure. What does this mean for today's hearing? It strengthens our case considerably, Meredith assured her. We now have documented evidence of attempted fraud, not just questionable business practices. The court should have no difficulty removing the fraudulent liens. Helena cleared her throat. There's another matter you should be aware of. The SEC has formally requested an interview with you, Emma. As Mark's spouse and a signatory on various financial documents, they're interested in your knowledge of Prestige's operations. Emma nodded. I expected that. When? Tomorrow morning. I'll accompany you, Helena said. The key is to be completely transparent about what you knew and when. Based on what you've shared so far, you appear to be a victim of your husband's deceptions rather than a participant. The courthouse was unusually busy when we arrived for the emergency hearing. The Velocity Capital situation had clearly captured local interest, particularly since Mark's family had been prominent in Mapleton for generations. His father had been a respected judge before retiring, and his mother still served on several influential community boards. As we made our way to the assigned courtroom, I spotted Eleanor Winters, Mark's mother, standing with a small group near the water fountain. Her normally perfect posture seemed diminished, her expression strained. When she saw Emma, something complicated passed across her face, a mixture of anguish, anger, and perhaps shame. Emma, she called, stepping away from her group. A moment, please. Emma hesitated, glancing at Meredith, who nodded slightly. Go ahead, we have time. I accompanied Emma as she approached her mother-in-law, standing supportively at her side. Eleanor, Emma acknowledged formally. The warm relationship they'd once shared had cooled considerably since Emma had begun questioning Mark's financial decisions. Is it true? Eleanor asked without preamble. Has Mark really disappeared with valuables from your home? Emma met her gaze steadily. Yes. After draining our accounts, attempting to use my inheritance as collateral without permission, and placing fraudulent liens against my properties. Eleanor flinched. There must be some misunderstanding. Mark wouldn't... The police have documented everything, Emma interrupted gently but firmly. As has my attorney. The SEC is investigating his representations to investors. These aren't allegations, Eleanor. They're documented facts. Mark's mother seemed to age before our eyes, her carefully maintained facade crumbling. Where would he go? What was he thinking? I don't know, Emma admitted. The Mark I thought I knew wouldn't have done any of this. But clearly I didn't know him as well as I believed. Eleanor's eyes flicked to me, hardening slightly. Barbara, I suppose you're satisfied now. You never approved of Mark's business approach. I kept my voice gentle, recognizing the pain behind her accusation. I took no satisfaction in being concerned about unsustainable business practices, Eleanor. And I take absolutely none in seeing those concerns validated in ways that harm both your son and my daughter. Something in my tone must have reached her. Her shoulders slumped slightly. Judge Colson is presiding over your hearing today, she said quietly to Emma. He was a colleague of Mark's father. I hope that won't affect his judgment. The evidence is clear, Emma replied, but thank you for the information. Eleanor nodded once, then hesitated. Whatever Mark has done, please remember there's still family involved. His actions don't reflect our values. With that cryptic statement, she returned to her group, leaving Emma and me to continue to the courtroom. That was unexpected, Emma murmured as we walked. Almost seemed like she was apologizing. In her way, perhaps she was, I suggested. This can't be easy for her either. The hearing itself was mercifully straightforward. Judge Colson, despite his connection to the Winters family, was visibly disturbed by the evidence Meredith presented. The fraudulent maintenance company with no actual employees or legitimate business operations. The identical handwriting on work orders, supposedly completed by different technicians. The timing of the liens coinciding precisely with velocities. Failed attempts to secure bridge financing. These appear to be clear attempts to encumber properties through fraudulent means, the judge concluded. The liens are hereby dissolved, and title shall be cleared on all properties in question. Additionally, I'm referring this matter to the district attorney for potential criminal charges. As we gathered our materials to leave, the judge addressed Emma directly. Mrs. Winters, the court acknowledges you as an innocent party in these proceedings. Whatever other matters may be pending between you and your husband, these properties remain your separate assets, free from encumbrance. Thank you, Your Honor, Emma replied simply. Outside the courtroom, Meredith was triumphant. Perfect outcome. The properties are secured, and the referral to the DA adds another layer of protection. Mark would be facing criminal charges if he attempted any further action against your assets. Emma nodded, but her expression remained troubled. It feels hollow, somehow. Winning against someone who isn't even here to defend himself. He chose not to be here, I reminded her gently. And his actions weren't momentary lapses in judgment, but calculated attempts to appropriate your inheritance. She sighed. No. It's just, 2 months ago, I thought we were building a life together. Now I'm in court protecting myself from him. The contrast was indeed stark. I remembered their wedding day, Emma radiant, Mark charming and seemingly devoted, the future stretching bright before them. How quickly it had all unraveled once the financial foundation proved unstable. One day at a time, I counseled, squeezing her hand. Today, your properties are secure. Tomorrow, you'll clarify your position with the SEC. Each step moves you towards stability. The following morning, we met Helena at her office before proceeding to the SEC interview. She spent an hour preparing Emma, emphasizing the importance of absolute factual accuracy. Don't speculate or offer opinions about Mark's motivations, she advised. Stick to what you personally witnessed, documents you actually saw, and conversations you directly participated in. If you don't know something, simply say so. Emma nodded, remarkably composed despite the stakes. What if they ask about my financial expertise? Whether I should have recognized problems earlier? Answer honestly, Helena said. Explain your background, your professional role, and how financial responsibilities were divided in your marriage. The goal isn't to appear financially naive, that could backfire, but to establish that you were systematically excluded from certain information despite having the capacity to understand it. The SEC representatives conducted the interview. At the Mapleton Federal Building, a female investigator named Carolyn Reeves and her male colleague, James Lawson. They were professionally courteous but thorough, recording the session and administering an oath before beginning questions. Mrs. Winters, please describe your understanding of Prestige's business model and revenue strategy, Ms. Reeves began. Emma provided a concise overview based on what Mark had shared with her over the years. The focus on exclusive user experience, the planned premium subscription model, the targeted advertising to luxury brands. And were you shown actual user metrics or revenue figures? Mr. Lawson asked. Only what Mark shared verbally at home, Emma replied. He would mention user growth numbers occasionally, usually round figures like, we hit 10,000 users this week. But I never saw the actual dashboards or analytics reports. Despite having an MBA and financial background? Ms. Reeves pressed. Emma met her gaze steadily. Yes. Mark positioned Prestige as his project and discouraged my professional input. When I asked specific questions about metrics or monetization timelines, he would say I was applying outdated thinking to an innovative model. The questioning continued for nearly 3 hours, covering everything from Emma's knowledge of investor presentations to specific conversations with Mark about Prestige's performance. She answered truthfully throughout, neither minimizing her financial knowledge nor exaggerating her access to Prestige's internal data. When asked about the fraudulent liens and attempted property transfers, Emma provided a clear timeline, supported by the documentation Helena had organized. The investigators seemed particularly interested in the timing, how the attempts to access her inheritance coincided with the collapsed bridge financing. One final question, Mrs. Winters, Ms. Reeves said as the interview concluded. Have you had any contact with your husband since his disappearance? None, Emma confirmed. No calls, texts, emails, or indirect messages through friends or family. And if he does contact you? I'll notify my attorney immediately, who will contact your office, Emma replied without hesitation. After the interview, Helena seemed satisfied. You did well, answered directly, stayed factual, and clearly established your separation from Prestige's operations despite having relevant expertise. Will they want to interview me again? Emma asked as we walked to the parking lot. Possibly, as their investigation develops. But based on today, I believe they're correctly categorizing you as a witness rather than a subject of investigation. That evening, we celebrated the small victory with a quiet dinner at home. I made Tom's favorite lasagna recipe, comfort food that had marked family milestones for decades. As we ate, Emma seemed more relaxed than she had in days, the immediate, legal threats to her inheritance resolved and the SEC interview behind her. I've been thinking about next steps, she said, refilling our water glasses. The legal separation is proceeding, the properties are secure, and my personal finances are disentangled from Mark's. But I need to start rebuilding, not just protecting. What remains? What are you considering? I asked, pleased to hear her thinking turn toward the future. I'm meeting with my boss at the marketing firm tomorrow. I've been on leave this past week, but I want to discuss taking on additional responsibilities. With everything that's happened, I need to reestablish financial independence beyond just protecting assets. I nodded approvingly. That's wise. Income stability is crucial during periods of financial reconstruction. She hesitated, then continued. I'm also considering what to do with Dad's commercial properties. They're generating steady rental income. But I wonder if more active management might increase returns. This was exactly the kind of forward thinking I'd hoped to hear. Your father was always conservative with those properties, maintaining high occupancy with reasonable rents rather than maximizing short-term revenue. But there might be opportunities for thoughtful enhancements. That's what I was thinking. Not Mark's approach of leveraging everything to the hilt, but strategic improvements to gradually increase value. Her eyes brightened with genuine interest. Maybe modernizing the heating and cooling systems in the office building to reduce operating costs, or reconfiguring some of the retail spaces to attract higher-paying tenants. We spent the next hour discussing potential property improvements, calculating approximate costs and returns. Emma's natural analytical abilities, temporarily submerged during her marriage to Mark, resurfaced as she worked through various scenarios. This was the daughter I knew, thoughtful, strategic, balancing innovation with prudence. Our planning session was interrupted by Emma's phone ringing, an unknown number with a New York area code. She glanced at me questioningly before answering. On speaker. Emma Winters speaking. Mrs. Winters, this is Detective Michael Rivera with the NYPD Financial Crimes Unit. I'm calling regarding your husband, Mark Winters. Emma straightened in her chair. Yes, Detective. We believe we've located Mr. Winters. A man matching his description using the name Marcus Winthrop checked into the Plaza Hotel 4 days ago. Hotel security became suspicious when he attempted to sell several pieces of jewelry through the concierge service. My eyes met Emma's across the table, her grandmother's jewelry collection. Has he been arrested? Emma asked. Not yet. We're establishing surveillance and coordinating with federal authorities given the SEC investigation. I'm calling because we need confirmation on specific items he may have in his possession. Could you provide a detailed description of the jewelry you reported missing? Emma complied, describing each piece from her grandmother's collection in meticulous detail. The pearl necklace and earrings, the sapphire pendant, the diamond tennis bracelet. Detective Rivera confirmed that several items matched those Marcus Winthrop had attempted to sell. We'll proceed with apprehension once we've coordinated with the SEC. In the meantime, please don't attempt to contact Mr. Winters. If he reaches out to you, please notify us immediately. After the call ended, Emma sat in silence for a long moment. New York, she finally said. I should have guessed. He always talked about Manhattan as the only place sophisticated enough for his talents. Mapleton was just his temporary base until he made it big. I watched complex emotions cross her face. Relief at knowing Mark's whereabouts, anger at his attempted sale of her family heirlooms, perhaps even a flicker of sadness for what might have been. At least now there might be some accountability, I offered, and possibly recovery of your grandmother's jewelry. Emma nodded slowly. I wonder what he was thinking. Surely he must have known hotel staff would be suspicious of someone selling valuable jewelry. Desperation affects judgment, I said. And Mark has always had a certain arrogance about his ability to charm his way through situations. She sighed, pushing away from the table to stand by the kitchen window. Outside, dusk was settling over my modest backyard, the maple trees silhouetted against the darkening sky. You know what's strangest about all this, Mom? Despite everything he's done, I still catch myself wondering if there's an explanation I'm missing. Some reason that would make his actions understandable, if not excusable. I joined her at the window, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. That's because you have integrity and empathy. You want to believe others operate with similar values. I feel so foolish sometimes, she admitted quietly. All those warning signs I ignored. The excessive spending, even as he claimed the business, was thriving. The vague answers about revenue models, the way he dismissed your perfectly reasonable questions about profitability metrics. You weren't foolish, I insisted. You were trusting, which is entirely different. And remember, Mark convinced sophisticated venture capitalists and angel investors to fund Prestige repeatedly. Professional investors with due diligence teams missed the same red flags. This perspective seemed to comfort her. I suppose that's true. Richard once boasted that their due diligence was the most rigorous in the industry. Yet they continued funding a platform with declining engagement metrics and no clear path to profitability, I pointed out. You're being harder on yourself than on the professionals who made the same misjudgments with far more information. The phone rang again. Meredith, this time, calling with news about the impending Velocity bankruptcy filing. We put her on speakerphone. The creditors' committee is forming, and they're particularly interested in asset recovery, she explained. Since you've already documented Mark's removal of valuable items from your home, they want detailed inventories and approximate values. I've already prepared that for the police report, Emma said. But how does this affect me? Those were marital assets. Technically, yes, Meredith agreed. But given the timing and circumstances of their removal, combined with the SEC investigation, the bankruptcy trustee will likely categorize this as fraudulent conveyance, assets inappropriately removed to hinder creditors. The good news is, that puts the focus on recovering from Mark, rather than from you. After finishing with Meredith, we retired to the living room with cups of tea. The day's developments, the SEC interview, Emma's forward planning, and now the news of Mark's location, had left us both mentally exhausted, but cautiously optimistic. 1 week, Emma mused, curling into the corner of the sofa. It's been exactly 1 week since I discovered Mark had taken my inheritance documents. It feels like a lifetime. Crisis compresses and expands time simultaneously, I observed. Each day brings so many developments that weeks seem to pass, yet the initial shock still feels recent. She nodded, sipping her tea thoughtfully. I keep thinking about that conversation at your birthday dinner, when you questioned Mark about Prestige's path to profitability. He was so dismissive, so certain of his superior financial understanding. And all along you saw what I couldn't or wouldn't see. I had the advantage of emotional distance, I reminded her, and decades of watching business cycles repeat themselves. The specific technologies change, but the fundamental principles remain. Like gravity, Emma said with a small smile. The packaging changes, but the underlying force works the same way. I recognized my own words from our earlier conversations and felt a surge of hope that my daughter was reclaiming not just her financial independence, but her confidence in her own judgment. The subtle chime of Emma's phone interrupted the moment, an email notification. She glanced at the screen, then sat up straighter, her expression sharpening. It's from Mark, she said, her voice suddenly tense. Sent from an account I don't recognize. I leaned forward. What does it say? She read aloud. Emma, I know you must be confused and angry about recent events. Nothing is as it appears. I had to take drastic measures to protect what we've built. We can still salvage everything if you'll trust me one last time. I need you to withdraw your objections to using the commercial properties as collateral. The SEC investigation is a misunderstanding that my attorneys are resolving. Please don't believe what others are saying about me or Prestige. I'll explain everything when we meet. Come to New York, and I'll return your grandmother's jewelry as a gesture of good faith. This email account is secure. Let me know when you arrive. Mark. The audacity was breathtaking. After everything, the drained accounts, the fraudulent liens, the stripped house, he still believed he could manipulate Emma with vague assurances and the promise of returning what he had stolen. Emma looked up from her phone, her expression somewhere between disbelief and grim determination. He actually thinks this might work, that after everything, I'd still trust him with my inheritance. "What will you do?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. She was already forwarding the email to Meredith, Detective Rivera, and Helena. "Exactly what I promised the SEC. Report any contact immediately." Her fingers moved efficiently across the screen, adding a brief note explaining when and how she'd received the message. After sending the email, she set her phone down with finality. "This ends now. No more manipulation. No more benefit of the doubt." I watched my daughter with profound pride. The painful revelations of the past week had stripped away illusions, but revealed her fundamental strength, the resilience, intelligence, and integrity that had always been her true inheritance from Tom and me. "He never understood what real wealth is," Emma said softly. "He chased the appearance of success while undermining its foundation. All those lectures about my outdated financial thinking, when the principles you and Dad taught me are exactly what will rebuild my life now." Outside, the last light faded from the sky, stars becoming visible above the maple trees. Whatever tomorrow would bring, Mark's arrest, bankruptcy proceedings, continued investigations, Emma would face it with clear eyes and renewed confidence in her own judgment. The painful lessons of recent days had been costly, but not defining. She would emerge stronger, wiser, and ultimately, I believed, happier. The investment advice Mark had dismissed as worthless was proving to be her most valuable asset. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.